This is my review of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode is the second half of The Lovers, Part 2, and it ends with probably one of the most interesting ideas for it. So, I mentioned last time that I like this idea of having to go inside the human body to face off against the stand, and this time is no different. So as Kakyoin and Polnareff are actually getting close to facing off against the Lovers, while Jojo keeps Steely Dan distracted. Steely Dan actually senses that the two stand users are getting close to finding the Lovers, and actually has Jojo scratches back to inconvenience them, and it works because thanks to the connection between him and Joseph actually starts drawing a crowd because he is now getting tickled out of nowhere, and ironically, it enables them to get enough money to buy the TV that Joseph is using to project where the stands are in his brain so that they can move to a more remote location, which does not play out in Steely Dan's favor. And meanwhile, Joseph is keeping a list of all the things he needs to pay Steely Dan back for, and it's quite the list. And Steely Dan actually gets very upset when he finds out he finds out that Jojo is keeping a list, and actually beats him up for it. And also, it escalates to the point where Jojo is forced to shoplift, and is then beaten up by the owner of the jewelry store, so that Jojo gets thrown out on his ass. But he's laughing all the while because he's just adding that to his list, so that he has even more to pay Steely Dan back for. Meanwhile, Polnareff and Kakyoin finally arrive at Joseph's brainstem and actually locate the stand, but quickly discover that they're quite outclassed once inside the human body, as the Lovers claims, at least to his own knowledge, that he has embraced his own weaknesses and has mastered his capabilities. So he's kind of hard to hit because he found out a while ago that. And by the way, the Lovers is apparently sentient. I mean, we've seen somewhat sentient stands before, I think. I don't remember if we have. This might be the first instance. I don't know. But the Lovers is sentient and has actually mastered his own capabilities. So, case in point, he knows he's not very powerful and able to take either of the stands in a one-on-one fight. So it's found out that it can actually utilize the brain cells and turning them into mush, because that works for some reason, and uses them to create clones of himself and also disguise itself. So the two stands are at quite the disadvantage and are unable to actually hit the Lovers. But eventually Kakyoin does come up with a plan and finds a way to track down which stand is the real one and how many of them are actually clones, by using Hierophant Green's tendrils to latch itself onto all the different clones until it finds the real stand, then absolutely decimates the real stand. Which is when things finally take a turning point in Jojo's favor, as now that Steely Dan's real stand has been exposed, he starts groveling like a baby, and Jojo is probably going to beat him up now because he realizes that he's now weak. And at which point he decides to feign weakness, and when in actuality he's sending the Lovers back to where his location is to stop Jojo and pin him in his place. Which doesn't work because Star Platinum has been established to have superhuman reflexes at this point, but it should be noted that Joseph and the others aren't able to get back to Jojo in time before he finds out. But he does stop it eventually. But he does stop it when the Lovers does indeed eventually show up. Meanwhile, as I said, the Lovers does indeed leave Joseph's body, and Joseph uses Haman to destroy the flesh bud in his own brain, which enables him to finally be free of it. But he's also realizes the danger that Jojo might be in if the Lovers gets back to him. And as I said, the Lovers doesn't make it to Jojo because Jojo uses his stand to actually stop to actually stop the lovers from entering his brain, and actually manages to crush it in between two fingers, something that Steely Dan notably isn't comfortable with, and agrees to leave Jojo and the others alone in exchange for his life, which Jojo complies with, but then Steely Dan doesn't really know when to actually give up, and actually tries to send his stand into the brain of a little girl in order to force Jojo to submit to him again, and threatens to stab him with a knife if he doesn't comply. If he complies, but then it's revealed that Kakyoin actually kept his tendril wrapped around the lovers the entire time, and when the lovers actually made it over there, he actually reached the limit of Hierophant Green's range, and actually got stuck before he could actually reach the girl's brain. So he wasn't able to actually get into the girl's brain, which means that Steely Dan kind of froze in his tracks because he's now immobilized and unable to move. And then Jojo finishes him off with a flurry rush because he realizes that that he'll never actually truly be able to pay it back with money, and then beats him up, and then leaves. And then leaves before giving them the receipt. Quite literally, signing his name on it and then throwing it at him before the episode ends. So yeah, as I said in the last episode, the Lovers is indeed a very powerful stand when it's in its natural environment. As I said, once it's inside a person, it's extremely powerful, and even inside a person, when confronted one-on-one, it is still very powerful. Because while it isn't very strong on its own, it made clones of itself to compensate, and was even able to disguise itself as Hierophant Green for a bit. So it's able to use subterfuge and massive numbers to just overwhelm anybody who would try to attack it. Unfortunately, he underestimated his own opponents, which enabled the two stand users to finally defeat it and send it packing. So, yeah, the Lovers is simultaneously the weakest and strongest stand, because while it is the weakest stand, it has since mastered its capabilities. But unfortunately, Steely Dan himself didn't really do much of his homework, so he didn't really know what his enemy stands were capable of. Therefore, because Steely Dan and the Lovers kind of share a brain and therefore share information, although the Lovers is independent, that is how it works. The stand doesn't know any. The stand can only know things that the person controlling it does. So he didn't know any of what the powers that be of the stands he was facing actually were, and therefore he got his ass kicked. But yeah, this episode was interesting. I liked it. It was an interesting way to end off the two-parter, and I am indeed looking forward to what kind of stands there are next. There's a stink bug. Get off. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to leave this episode here. So if you guys have indeed enjoyed this episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, what did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below to keep up to date with what's going on with the channel, so be sure to check those out. And also, if you want to help support the show, then be sure to check out my Patreon. It's only a couple bucks a month. Helps me out, helps me improve the content for you guys, and you guys get access to a bunch of different perks as well if you decide to do that. So, yeah, be sure to check that out in the description below as well. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!